it sounds incredibly difficult. I hope you're all able to navigate it with your families safely. So let me just get right to it. So I got my start in conservation advocacy in the early 2000s. I was an environmental attorney at a big corporate law firm in Washington, D.C. And they were cool enough to let me take on a pro bono project for American Whitewater, which was a big deal for me, you know, a whitewater kayaker. And it helped renegotiate a hydropower permit for a really amazing river, Maryland's first wild and scenic river, to get a better flow regime and improve the situation for the environment there. And, you know, that was really for me a fork in the road that led me to become, you know, founding executive director at Outdoor Alliance, and actually to be here with all of you today. So Outdoor Alliance, it's a pretty great coalition of 10 member organizations, including, of course, American Whitewater, Surfrider Foundation, International Mountain Bicycling Association, Access Fund, American Alpine Club, and others. And we've got a collective reach of north of 500,000 people across the country in terms of membership and you know, email lists and whatnot. And there are essentially two big parts of our mission at Outdoor Alliance. And the first is to conserve and protect public lands and waters for their intrinsic value, for their ecological value, which is important, but also their social value, for what they mean to people, to local economies, local communities. These places deserve to be protected in and of themselves, but they also deserve to be protected for what they mean to the communities surrounding them. And then the second big part of our mission is to turn outdoor enthusiasts into outdoor advocates, to essentially leverage everybody's love of place to conserve and protect those places. So essentially what we do is at Outdoor Alliance, with our team and the team of the member organizations, we pay attention to what's going on in the policy world. And what do you mean by that is what's going on in Congress, in federal agencies like the Forest Service, the Bureau of Land Management, Park Service, state houses, and the administration. You know, what are they thinking about in terms of conservation, in terms of what to do with public lands and waters? And we sift through all that stuff and figure out, okay, what's relevant to our community? What are things where we could speak authentically about? And also, what is actionable? It's one thing to have an opinion about something. It's another thing to try to make something happen, how to turn an idea, a compelling policy idea, into some type of reality. And you know, a couple examples that we've got, and also this work, sometimes it takes like years and years for stuff to move forward, and sometimes it happens really quickly. So something that we've been working on for a really long time, fully and permanently funding the Land and Water Conservation Act. And so earlier this year, this summer, Congress passed and the president signed into law the Great America's Outdoors Act. So we've got full and permanent funding for Land and Water Conservation Fund. It's a huge deal, big generational accomplishment that's taken a really long time. And we're delighted to have a hand in helping make that happen, along with a lot of other actors in the space. But sometimes stuff happens really quickly. For example, BLM, Bureau of Land Management in Utah, they're really keen on leasing energy leases across the state. And we found out that they wanted to do some energy leases in the same geography, same actual places of, you know, mountain bike trails like Slick Rock, if anybody's heard of that. So we mobilized the community, had them, BLM actually dropped it. They flinched. They said, all right, we're sorry. We're not going to do oil gas leasing on some of the best mountain biking in the world. And that all happened very rapidly. So sometimes stuff takes a long time. Sometimes stuff happens quickly. And those are a couple of kind of examples that we were working on this last year. We're also pretty deeply engaged in forest planning in California, Utah, Colorado, North Carolina, you know, collectively about 18 million acres of public lands. So you might be asking, what does any of this have to do with California, other than California being a pretty big important state? And I'll tell you, like, a lot. There's a lot to do with California. As you all know, California's an enormous state on any measure of size. But for our perspective, you've got a ton of public lands and waters, world-class natural resources. And coupled with that, you've got an enormous constituency for the outdoors, from the business community, from the user community. It's just, you have the land and the resources, but also the awareness and the experience for what these places mean beyond the intrinsic value for their social value. And then politically speaking, you got 53 members of Congress. That's a lot. The total number of House of Representatives is 435. So 53 out of 435 of the people that are helping making laws for the whole country are in California. And I think that, when we look at this, it's a big, important state, a lot of public lands, but, this constellation of factors creates an ability to influence and drive national conservation policy in a really substantial manner. And not just for California, but for the entire country. And I'll give you a couple examples. So there are three really amazing land conservation bills in California, based in California, that have made their way through the House of Representatives. Central Coast Heritage Protection Act, Northwest California Wilderness Recreation Working Forest Act, and San Gabriel Foothills legislation. So really three compelling landscapes. They've taken into account recreation in a really thoughtful, careful, precise way. A lot of support from our community. They passed from the House, as I mentioned earlier this year. And they were also packaged with some really compelling legislation in Colorado, two exciting bills there, and one up in Washington State. So this momentum, these three big bills in California, coupled with these bills in Colorado and in Washington State, were added to the, get kind of nerd out on this, the NDAA. It's the way that we fund defense in Congress, and that's a piece of legislation that really has got to get passed every year. So coupling this public lands initiative with this NDAA makes it more likely that this lands package passes. And the momentum that we get from these three bills in California is pulling along, of course, these initiatives in Colorado and Washington State. So in addition to these protected designations, I'm going to just pivot to equitable access and California's role in that. Let me be crystal clear. Access to the outdoors is not equitable in this country. It's never been. And there's a lot of work to do, but there's ways to make it more equitable. Pieces of legislation that are floating around these days: outdoors for all, active transportation for public lands, and then transit trails. Those are three of my favorite equitable access pieces of legislation. And guess who comes up with these pieces of legislation? That's right, lawmakers in California. So you're on the leading edge of thinking about equitable access. You understand it, you could pursue it genuinely. And these bills are not limited just to the state of California. This would have an impact across the country. So the leadership opportunities in California are substantial. And let me just wrap up by saying that, bring this back to all of you. Your interest in policy and advocacy and conservation is obviously peaked. You're here. And I am grateful for it. And I also would encourage you to nurture that interest and cultivate that interest by learning about this stuff by yourselves, but also affiliating yourselves with people within your community. And two easy ways to do that is join one of the Outdoor Alliance member organizations like Access Fund or Winter Wildlands Alliance at the national level, or one of their state affiliates would be even better. Join our email list at Outdoor Alliance, because that's the main way we communicate with the community, to give them opportunities to engage. And then, when you're working on issues, on advocacy, the issues are important. Okay, it's the gateway for getting involved in this whole space. But spend some time thinking about the relationships as well. What I mean by that is that you could show up to a policymaker and lay down exactly how you want the world to work out and what's important to you, and make all your compelling arguments about why they need to think a certain way about a certain issue. And that's essential. But you're talking to other human beings, and they've got responsibilities to represent all their constituents. And it's a tough job being a policymaker, being a lawmaker. And to the extent that you could establish a dialogue with these folks and present yourself as a resource, as somebody who understands these issues, cares about these issues, you could go beyond just talking about a particular issue and talking about bigger picture conservation in general, and help lawmakers and policymakers kind of think about how they approach conservation generally. And these relationships could be long-standing, and they can help you, help us, and help everybody else, inform the world in the way that you want to see it. So that's what I've got. I'm happy to take questions. Maybe pass things on to Lisa.
Great, thanks, Adam. We're going to pass it on to Lisa. Lisa, please turn your video and mute off, on, and Adam, you're off. Lisa, you're up next.
Can you hear and see me now?
Yes, you're good.
Okay, great. I'm sorry about that. We had a little technical glitch at the beginning of the program. I was on, I could hear you, but you couldn't hear me. So I really apologize for that. As Matt mentioned, we have 1,300 member companies, and they range from everything from small retail to large manufacturers and suppliers. And California is a really important part of what I think of as our outdoor recreation ecosystem. As Matt mentioned, I used to work for the National Park Foundation, and prior to that, I was at Great Outdoors Colorado. But going way back in my history, I worked for California Fish and Game and the Resources Agency, and was a wildlife biologist in Kenya. And it's probably what has informed a lot of my thinking about the outdoor industry and how we're part of a system. And when I think about that system, and I want you to think about it this way too, because much of what you're going to be talking about today really reflects that. We have companies that produce outdoor goods, nonprofits that do advocacy like Cramer's group, the Outdoor Alliance, who we work with very closely. Our public lands, whether those are state, federal, or local public lands, local governments, and consumers and users of those public lands. And that's who really makes up the outdoor recreation ecosystem. And we know that for any of it to work, all of it needs to work. And prior to the pandemic, it's funny, I'm thinking about this a lot today because it's snowing here in Colorado, and it was 100 degrees this weekend, and we were on fire, just like California. And then we dropped 65 degrees to snow. So we also think about the natural world as part of our ecosystem and our ability to get outside, and how the pandemic has affected all that we do. And prior to the pandemic, this outdoor recreation economy was huge and was growing faster than the gross domestic product. So when you think about that, and you think about how important California is in that system, maybe 1/6 of the total, what we call the outdoor recreation economy, is generated in California. Looking at the data that we've got, about $6.2 billion in annual consumer spending is happening in California pre-pandemic around the outdoor recreation economy. It's almost 700,000 jobs, and it's generating $92 billion in state, local, and federal tax revenue. So it's a big business in California, and you're an important part of it. This industry was hit very hard by the pandemic, in large part due to the fact that it's, dependent on retail. And so across our system, we saw 60 and 70% declines in revenue in March and April. But the good news is, in May, June, July, and even into August, we've really seen a recovery starting to happen. And I think for people on this seminar, you already get outside, and unless you've really stayed in your house and not stuck your head out your door, you can't help but see that more people are getting outside than ever. We don't have a lot of data. It's mostly anecdotal, but people are doing whatever they can to be outside. It is one of the few things you can do as a family, you can do to connect and for your health and well-being. And so people are craving being outside right now, whether it's a beach, a park, or a trail. We do have some data that indicates, we do an annual participation study, and the early data from that indicates that day hiking was up 8% year over year, just in the first 4 months of the year. And we don't even have the data yet for July and August. So we know it's recovering, and there is a silver lining. As part of that, though, the outdoor industry has been advocating, and as part of a large coalition, which is also, the Outdoor Alliance is also a part of that, called Recreate Responsibly. We want to make sure that all these new people that are getting outside, or people that are outdoor enthusiasts, are doing so responsibly, and they're thinking about COVID safety, they're thinking about inclusivity in the outdoors, and they're thinking about leave no trace or do no harm when you're outdoors. So I want to talk a little bit more about what the role of OIA is in this bigger ecosystem, and how we're thinking about our work. And when we think about a healthy outdoor recreation economy, and we think about healthy businesses, we're really thinking about it as a system of thriving businesses, people thriving outside, and a thriving planet. And each of those elements intersect with each other, and each has a data component that drives what we do, a programmatic component, which is usually what we're offering to our businesses, and a policy component. And the policy lever is really important. When I think about the thriving business piece, this year it's been very much focused on a programmatic and lobbying standpoint on how can we help our businesses secure paycheck protection loans and other assistance that they've needed to get through COVID-19. We continue to lobby on trade. Our industry is hit very hard by punitive tariffs, China tariffs, and other heavy tariffs on our goods. We're still focused. We realize that many times people think of the outdoor industry and think of a focus on federal public lands, and federal public lands are very important, but we also know that the majority of Americans that get outside do so within 10 miles of their home. In fact, it's 67%, according to our participation data. So close to home recreation is very important. And many times that is really provided by local government or state government. And so creating state offices of outdoor recreation, or task forces, or ways to engage our businesses and nonprofits and this whole ecosystem at the state level is very important to us. And we have 16 of these offices across the United States, another 10 that are task forces or working groups. And they've been critical. I know in my own state of Colorado, they were really a crucial part of working with the governor's office and making sure that outdoor businesses receive recovery dollars as part of the outdoor recreation economy in our state. The other part of thriving business that OIA works with for our companies that belong to the OIA are really around emerging leaders and building future workforce. And then we're also thinking about how do we tie that to the work that we do on thriving people. And thriving people for us, the data piece is the participation report. The programmatic piece is our relationship with our charitable foundation, the Outdoor Foundation. And the Outdoor Foundation is very focused on creating local networks of existing organizations to deliver better and more coordinated repeat and reinforcing experiences for children, particularly children of color or from communities that are underserved in terms of outdoor recreation. The policy piece that we're focused on under Thriving People is really focused around public lands, but at the state, local, and federal level. And also thinking about how do we tie that to the workforce work that we do under Thriving Business. I'm happy to say that in California, one of our pilot communities for the Thrive Outside communities is in San Diego. And I think you're going to be hearing from Lesford Duncan later today, who leads outdoor outreach in San Diego, who's one of our core partners. I'm really happy to say that in the first year of this pilot program by the Outdoor Foundation, we've reached 16,000 children across the US in our 4 pilot communities. in repeat and reinforcing experiences. And the kids have had, even in the time of COVID-19, between 4 and 5 experiences in the outdoors in last year alone. The other piece on the policy front, we're really tied very closely with the Outdoor Alliance on many of this under Thriving People. We want to make sure public lands are protected. We want to make sure there's expansion of public lands at the state, local, and federal level, particularly to create more equitable access in the outdoors. We also know that simply providing the place isn't enough. Sometimes transportation is an issue, so we'd like to see that addressed. And oftentimes programs can be an important way to introduce new communities to the outdoors or to better connect communities to the outdoors. And then on Thriving Planet, we're really focused on climate change right now. When I think about the fires in California and the fires in Colorado and this dramatic shift in the weather that we're having in Colorado, you can't help but think about the impacts of climate change and how that impacts people's ability to get outside and impacts their health and well-being. So this year, the Outdoor Industry Association launched the Climate Action Corps, and we have 83 companies currently signed up for it. And it's a collective effort to reduce greenhouse gases in the outdoor industry. And we're helping them create a roadmap and giving them the tools and resources they need, and then also measuring baseline where they are today so that we can set a target and measure that in the future. But we also know, like business and people, that that's just one lever that we can pull. And so the other piece that the outdoor industry is very focused on within Thriving Planet is to also advocate at the state, local, and federal level on climate policy. And there, what we're thinking about a lot is how can you incentivize businesses to reduce their greenhouse gases? How can you increase renewable supplies to fuel our industry? How can we use natural climate solutions? And how do we increase transit to trails and other forms of connection to the outdoors that are people-powered transportation? So I encourage you, all of the policy work that we do is very dependent on activating our grassroots. And for us, our grassroots are our businesses or you. And so we really look to state business alliances to engage on these issues and have formed alliances with groups like the Outdoor Alliance, the Conservation Alliance, and other conservation groups where we can find overlapping interests to make our voice louder and stronger and more effective. And with that, I will stop. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Lisa. Okay, and then if you want to just get rid of your video, perfect. All right, again, good morning. My name is Matt Lyon. Normally, I would have bright streaming sunshine coming through in the morning. I don't know if anyone can see this, but it's like night outside. Cars are driving by with their lights still on at 9:30 in the morning. It's a crazy day. Probably a good day for us to be talking about this and about advocacy in general. I'd like to start with just a little story of last year. Outdoor Alliance, Outdoor Industry Association, and Corp fitting together. Got a great story about that from last year. So Outdoor Alliance, Outdoor Industry Association are national organizations. Obviously, as they mentioned, California very important in the national picture. But national organizations and Corp were very specific to just what's happening within the state and in making sure we can coordinate and mobilize on the ground. Last year, we all came together around support of the bill AB 1111, which was for an outdoor recreation office. So Outdoor Industry Association and Corp joined together to hire a lobbyist and to coordinate our efforts in Sacramento with the legislatures and with the administration. So meeting together weekly on that and figuring out sort of our strategy and talking to folks, lining things up and moving this forward. And then Outdoor Alliance was critical each time, because part of that was in Sacramento, but another big part was on the ground in local districts. And as we organize local district meetings with legislators, especially key ones on committees as the bills are moving through, or with the administration, Outdoor Alliance members were part of those meetings and played a big part in kind of representing the local fabric of outdoor recreation to those legislators. I had a meeting in Half Moon Bay. It was with Lenny Mendoza, who was head of the GoBiz office at that time. We did a very short notice from Corp. We had a member from Specialized Bikes come down, and from the Eastern Sierra government organization. And then we had some local members of the mountain bike associations there around Half Moon Bay, and a surf rider also show up, which was really important to Lenny Mendoza because he actually owned the Half Moon Bay brewery that we were at. So it's great how our three organizations have worked together to affect and become more effective, I'd say, as a group representing outdoor recreation here in California. So a little bit more on Corp. So outdoor recreation industry has been active in California for a long time, as Adam noted. However, Corp's formal advocacy on behalf of the industry only stretches back a few years, with this annual Sacramento Summit being only our third. As a new and growing organization, I always appreciate the time to talk about our positions and review some of the accomplishments that we've made so far. A question that I received a lot last year as we were pushing for the AB 1111 is, how is Corp's priorities different from that of an Office of Outdoor Recreation? I can understand the confusion that grew out of the fact that really for the first few years, Corp's really focused mission was around advocating for bills that would establish a California OREC. So I'll get to our priorities in a moment, but let me just say that, well, none of these bills were ultimately signed into law yet. We've learned a great deal about the landscape of politics in Sacramento, California. There are many established groups and agencies that share our priorities. And as a board for 2020, we decided that this would be a good year to set aside that OREC initiative and instead focus on supporting the efforts and activities of our other organizations that have overlapping priorities. To put it simply, this year our focus has been to show that we're an active supporter and ally for all of our priorities, not just the OREC issue. So what are these priorities? The first is to advocate for the prioritization of investments in outdoor recreation. It's fairly straightforward. It includes investments such as parks, trail maintenance, and transportation. Skate parks, interesting one. And other indirect investments such as conservation of public lands with recreational access, and efforts to preserve our public lands in the face of the new challenges of climate change. With COVID-19 and now fire season upon us, 2020 has been a great reminder of the health benefits of outdoor recreation and how our entire society gains when we get outdoors. Our second priority is the development of programs that raise awareness and educate about the benefits of outdoor recreation. So this includes an establishment of an Office of Outdoor Recreation, which we still believe is the clearest way to maintain a high priority for outdoor recreation within the various agencies and functions of our state government. Our objective also includes supporting educational programs, raising awareness of outdoor rec, and supporting the economic development and job creation around the outdoor recreation economy and our green economy in general. And really that's a lot of it is about our sustainable job opportunities versus extraction and other opportunities, which are the opposite. Our third priority is to enable business success for our members. So similar to OIA, we are formed around the outdoor recreation industry and primarily represent the employers here in the state. We would like to see regulation and policies that affect our industry streamlined, such as permit issuance and guide regulations. And we also would like to promote to increase research and data collection that quantifies the impacts of outdoor recreation on the population and on the economy. So weaving through all of these priorities has been a focus on equitable inclusion in the outdoors. It is so critical and timely that we have made it one of the main themes of today's summit. We've all been exposed in 2020 to the injustices, the protests, and education for all around the inequity in our society. And as an organization, we're also aware that this lack of equity exists in access to outdoor spaces. To put it simply, in California, we are a majority minority state, and our minority populations do not recreate outdoors at the same rate as the population as a whole. So to have the best chance that everything that we're fighting for, all of our advocacy, is going to last into future generations, we must have our entire population accessing the outdoors and gaining the firsthand appreciation for our natural lands and outdoor spaces. So one of our panels today will discuss the outdoor experiences of many who have felt unwelcome in the outdoors and the challenges they continue to face today. And then a second panel will talk about some of the actions that have been taken to start to address this inequity and some of our policy wins on this front. And thinking of our actions this year, I'd love to say that everyone has been laser focused on our priorities, but truly, like everyone, the concerns of our members have swung wildly, and we've really tried to contribute where possible. But I know personally with my company, Hydrapak, we've supply chain disruptions, workplace lockdowns, and then on the positive side, the biking and hiking booms in the last few months have really dominated the year for my team and for most of the equipment suppliers that I speak with. Other manufacturers and retailers have had different challenges, but really it's been hard for any company to stay focused on anything besides just keeping your head above water this year. But nevertheless, our core board members and staff have found time to move forward on many of our initiatives, and I thank them for their individual work. We started the year by participating on the Natural Resources Equitable Access Working Group, which is headed by Under Secretary Barranco, who we'll hear from in the next hour. We hosted an educational webinar with Parks California, so a relatively new entity focused on supporting our California park system. Played a key role in the California chapter of Recreate Responsibly, which Lisa spoke of, our industry's coordinated response to the challenges of the surge in outdoor activity after the COVID shutdowns. And then recently supported the Audubon Society and Azul with Measure AB 3030, while at the same time discussing with them our perspective on improving the bill language to ensure access for recreation. And then finally, we've turned what has been our lobbying summit today into really an ideas and a policy forum around, with leading figures from government and from advocacy all coming together to discuss outdoor recreation. And on a final note, I'll say you'll hear from many of our board members today who are participating in the various panels. I'm proud of their strong involvement and the leadership that they provide to our industry. As we say, we are a working board, so be prepared to work. And I'd like to throw out there a potential call to action to those who might be interested that we are going to be considering new members for the board over the next several months. And if this is something that interests you and excites you and something you'd be willing to spend time on, or if there's someone you'd like to nominate, please contact me or reach out to Lexi and we'll give you more details. And with that, I'll open it up. I think we have some questions for the group, for Lisa, Adam, and myself.
You're on mute, Steve.
Yeah. How about now?
Okay, we got the band.
Well, hi everybody. I'm Steve Barker. I've been asked to moderate a few tough questions for our prestigious industry leaders here. But first, let me say a couple things. First, big shout out to Lexi and Katie for pulling this all together. It was extreme cat herding, and I really appreciate the work you've done. And also let me say that I'd like to humbly recognize and acknowledge the Kumeyaay people upon whose land I live. The Kumeyaay have been stewards of this land for over 600 generations, and today are integral and vital leaders in the San Diego and Northern Baja regional communities, severely impacted today by the fires, the Valley Fire, especially the communities of Verona and Viejas. So let's all send our best wishes for safety for these critical communities. My hope that, in acknowledging the Kumeyaay, it's certainly out of respect, but you know, as an organization and an industry, our background, our playground, our infrastructure is the outdoors, and this could be an opportunity to contemplate the ways we can join in the decolonial and indigenous movements for sovereignty and self-determination, since we are also so vested in these lands that our first people have done such a great job stewarding over the years. My quick bio: board member of Corp, co-founder of Eagle Creek Travel Gear down in San Diego. I now have a consulting business called Wild Places, which kind of defines what I do. Co-founded the Escondido Creek Conservancy. We've conserved about 4,000 acres. We manage 3,000 acres daily, and each year we put about 4,000 kids from our 23 local elementary schools through Science or Nature program. Served on the OIA board as chair for a while. I currently serve on the Outdoor Foundation board, and I'm very proud of the work we're doing in cities across the country, especially in San Diego South Bay. My wife and I split our time between North County, San Diego, and Bishop, mostly around doing things in the outdoors and spending time with our grandkids. So thanks for that. It's good to see at least two of your faces. Adam, are you still with us, or have we lost you? Maybe we've lost Adam, but
I still see him here. He's here. He's on mute.
You know, we've had a lot of conversations over the years around how we can all cooperate and work together, and you've all talked about that. Interesting time today where we're seeing this outdoor renaissance. Just getting back from the east side of the Sierras, there wasn't a single campsite that wasn't occupied. All we need to do is look up and down the streets where we live on how many new RVs, rooftop tents on campers, to know that we are seeing something extraordinary going on as people embrace the outdoors. And at the same time, every campsite just about in the state is now closed. Everybody's been run out of the wilderness. You can't even have a cook fire outdoors right now. Certainly, those are two interesting opportunities for the industry to step up and show leadership. So maybe you could talk a little bit about how do we rise above our individual business challenges, which are no small things. Many of us have had to furlough or lost fellow employees, and at the same time, there's never been a more critical opportunity to move forward with some of our issues, to link climate change to outdoor participation and to our equitable access work. So, and you know, we're here in California, we're talking California. There's no better opportunity. We have a governor that supports what we do. We have a legislature which is solidly in support of what we do. So the opportunities to lead, set precedent for the whole country have never been better or more. Certainly there's a challenge finding the funding, but how can the industry lead? How can our folks that are dialed in here today, and thank you for tuning in, to our members and member organizations, how can they step up? What's your vision for where this can go? Maybe you could talk about how do we seize this opportunity, Lisa, Matt, and Adam. Any one of you can field this.
Well, maybe I'll just speak for a moment. You talk about rising above our business challenges. This has been I've been watching an incredible resurgence of activity, the kind that and really it's an insurgence of new participants. So bike industry, which I follow most closely, just families coming out that haven't come out for years, commuters, people becoming aware of the spaces around them to the tune of a 30% growth this year versus previous years. And this from a business, an industry that spent years lamenting a slow decline and a slow aging of the population and wondering how to reverse it. And so I think it's fantastic to just see the relevance of what we're doing on these fronts, and speaks a lot to getting together in groups that represent more than just our companies, but represent our industry and try to speak with a voice for the industry. So I think the bicycle industry is one that has not been as well organized as the outdoor industry over time, and certainly being organized to appeal to new entrants is a positive that we can have going forward. And fortunately, this the way that this has turned out, it's benefited the industry. It could have gone the other way if it were something else, but it's better to be organized and prepared. So I definitely feel the first step is coming together in groups like this. I think, again, this didn't exist in California a few years ago. As everyone's mentioned, very critical area, very critical space, but without a specific on the ground group that can rally and try to affect the change. So I think being organized, doing what we're doing today, continuing to grow this effort, I see as a real strong first step forward, if you will.
I have a question for Adam. California's got a long history of being leaders in conservation of natural lands and spaces. You just need to look at our Sierras and the huge roadless area we have in one of the most populated states in the country to know that there's been great leadership here around conservation. But as we all in the industry know, there's spaces, and then there's what happens in those spaces. And it takes dollars and focus to manage increased recreation on these outdoor spaces without having over tourism and impacting those conservation lands. Adam, how can the outdoor industry and the enthusiast groups that you represent step up and help find a pathway between helping people and facilitating outdoor recreation, and at the same time minimizing the negative impacts both on the communities and these precious outdoor spaces?
Well, it's tall order, Steve.
You're up to it. You're a tall guy.
Yeah. Wow. Well, a couple things. First and foremost, recommitting ourselves to like the basic conservation laws, like NEPA, right? Clean Water Act. There's been an effort to kind of erode these core tools that enable society to navigate these challenges in terms of like, we could have an impact, but how do you minimize the impact? How do you do it in a way that's thoughtful and also transparent, right? So you want to leverage community knowledge and involvement in these decisions. And if you don't have good environmental laws and regulations, it makes it really, really tough to do that, right? So we've got these laws on the books, and insisting that they are enhanced over time rather than degraded is one thing that we could do. So that's something that's collective. The second part about it, I mean, you could have like a good framework, but if you don't have the resources to do the environmental analysis, to convene people, the output's going to be kind of, less than it could be, All right, so and that involves, and you say money, where does that come from? Well, appropriations through Congress, and that is driven by what Congress people hear from their constituents, right? So if you say that this stuff is important, you got to fund the Forest Service and fund Bureau of Land Management, not just to do, giant infrastructure, but to convene people and do, thoughtful environmental analysis, we'll end up with some better outcomes. So those are two things that are meaningful, and that as a business community and broader community, we can help effectuate.
Thanks.
Welcome.
I have a question for Lisa related to participation. And we're going to talk a little bit more later about participation, but for many of us of my generation, we got out individually, and maybe it was because the world was a little less urbanized. It was a little easier to get into the outdoors. But today we find that most of folks that are introduced to the outdoors do it through some sort of program. How do you see this evolution towards funding outdoor programs? Is it public funding? Is it private funding? If we want to get kids outdoors, out of their communities, how do you see that rolling forward? And, is it through the school systems and outdoor ed, or do you have a vision for how this can work? And certainly there's a lot of interest in California. Maybe you could talk to that.
Steve, you keep serving up these complicated topics, but I'll try to make it uncomplicated. It's all of the above. And, it's interesting having joined the outdoor industry, which are largely a group of people that have been engaged in the outdoors for a long time, and were taken outside when they were young. And I think what we have to recognize is that it is a continuum of things that need to happen to really change, to move this needle. First, we need to address equitable access to the outdoors. We know from studies from the Trust for Public Land that 28 million children in America do not live within a 10-minute walk of a park. And when you think about being able to get outside easily without transportation, without a program, it's something close to home. To get further afield, we probably need all kinds of funding, whether it's state, local, or federal, to look at transportation and programmatic ways to get people outside. I think for those of you that got outside off when you were young, it was either a parent or a mentor that really gave you that, your great experiences in the outdoors, and that hasn't changed. It's hard as a kid to create your own experiences. You can in your backyard or at a neighborhood park, but for something further afield, you're going to need a mentor or a connection and some transportation. I think it's going to be a combination of funding and policy changes. When you think about accessibility, often it is local governments who are cash strapped right now due to COVID-19, but that's really where our neighborhood parks are formed. State parks also need funding. I'll build off what Adam said. I don't think the Land and Water Conservation Fund, which is the federal funding, would have passed if it hadn't been a major coalition of conservation groups, outdoor recreation groups, and the outdoor industry. And that business voice was really important. And that is adding a lot of money to our federal public land system. I think in many cases, nonprofits might be the best avenue to deliver the programming because they're based locally, they're community driven, they live in the community. And so, when I say all of the above, I hope people engage at all three levels. I hope you give generously to small local nonprofits that get kids outside. I hope you get active in local and state planning processes that increase parks and access to parks, and join with your business coalitions and your state coalitions to advocate at the federal level. I know I keep talking about systems, but it really is, that's going to be what's going to change how people access, enjoy, and experience the outdoors.
Okay, thanks, Lisa. What I heard for the 150 people on the Zoom today is get involved, step up, you can do something. And to that effect, I also want to say to all three of you, Matt, Adam, Lisa. Great respect, hats off to leading through these incredibly interesting and difficult times. Each one of you has your own challenges with your individual organizations, funding, etc. And yet you find time to lead and be a vision for the future. So we're very lucky in the outdoor industry to have folks like you. And with that, I'm turning it back over to Matt, and I will see you in a